Hey everybody, Jason here. Coming back to sort of revisit the conversation I was recording this morning about going back to try out, or I should say retry out, replay old games that I haven't played in a long time, namely and specifically basic D&D via the Rules Cyclopedia, that version of it, and going back to revisit some things that I have been very vocal about disliking, that being classes, race as class, and thief skills. And I spoke in my previous video about how much freedom is too much freedom when it comes to characters in role-playing games. And I think you get to a certain point, and not everybody, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but you might come to a point when certain players are the type of player that want to game the system and rules lawyer every character up to the point to where they're unstoppable. They are the jack of all trades, master of all, instead of master of none, they are mastering all the trades. They find little loopholes in the system to, be able to do everything, be almost unkillable, have the maximum damage of the output of the group, while also having the highest hit points, while also having the highest armor class, while also having the highest amount of spells, while also having the best equipment, while also having the highest skills. I like to play rules as written where I can. There are some things that we don't do rules as written, like critical hits and critical fumbles and stuff. I know most of that stuff that most gamer groups do are not typically rules as written. It's just they're house rules, but everybody's kind of always done that, so a lot of people probably don't realize they're not house rules, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so try to stay as rules as written as possible in an effort to play the game fairly, and also not let certain players game the system too much. I know every system can be gamed to a certain extent, but I have the feeling, and it's been so long since I've played basic D&D, I get the feeling that some of the things that I don't like may actually be beneficial to me as a gamer, as a dungeon master. Here's that shaky road again. Shaking this camera all up. Some of the things that I've been vocal about disliking may actually be a blessing in disguise, and I want to kind of go back and try and revisit those things to see if my theory is correct. Like I've always said, I'm not a fan of racist class, not a fan of percentile-based thief skills, but I would go back and play that edition of D&D at the drop of a hat, and I wouldn't think twice about it. I would go do it, because everything else about it is so good, then it kind of trumps any sort of negative feeling I have about some aspect of it. I feel like 5th edition, and again, like I said in the previous video, any game can be played in any style you want, but I think, Dungeons & Dragons itself as a game is built around combat. So you could, it doesn't matter if you're playing basic, if you're playing 4th edition, which is basically a minis game, or if you're playing 5th edition, which is a really good combination, I think, of every other system before it. You can have as much role-playing, or as little role-playing, or as much combat, or as least amount of combat as you want in a game. However, to be completely honest with yourself and all the other gamers and everybody, Dungeons & Dragons is built upon a combat system, combat dice system. We all know that. And that's not a bad thing at all. It is what it is. But so you have to realize that and come to terms with it and understand, are you okay with that, or are you not okay with that? Is it, And do you need a balance between role playing and combat? Do you prefer one over the other? I am at the point in my gaming career, which has been a sporadic 25-year career, that I'm leaning a little more towards role playing than I am combat. I love combat, but I want combat to have stakes. I want it to be fast. I want it to be aggressive and deadly. I don't want to spend 45 minutes on a combat, you know? It just is absurd to me. I want combats to be over in a couple rounds. I don't want to spend all night playing combat. If I want to do that, I'll play an actual skirmish minis game, which it does sound like fun. I would totally be up for that. Some BattleTech or maybe something from Osprey Games or something. But when I play a role-playing game, I don't want to play just a combat game. I want there to be role-playing in it. So I'm trying to find a balance between role-playing and the type of combat that I like. And while I love the mechanics of 5th edition, it's now in D&D in general, if I'm playing a game that's got Dungeons and Dragons on the cover of the book, not a retro clone of with a changed system, or not a inspired by, or not another OSR product, but if I'm playing D&D, no matter what, I'm going to run into things like hit point bloat, magic item stuff, combat fatigue. I mean, you name it. All the things that are in 5th edition will be in some other edition to some extent, whether higher or lower. I've just got to find, if I'm playing D&D, again, that's the caveat here, the sweet spot for me. Now, I have a bunch of other games in my library that I would love to play. I've got a couple games that I'm working on as far as mechanics, designing myself, which is not easy and very time consuming for someone who has no time. But if I'm going to play D&D, and I think that is a caveat, because it's much easier to get people to play a game they've heard of rather than, hey, I've got this new game I bought, let's try it out. I know you've never heard of it, and people don't like learning new systems. If you've played AD&D 1st edition, you can very easily make the jump to 3rd edition or 5th edition or whatever edition fairly easily, because it's all the same skeleton. It's just a different muscle structure outside the skeleton. But if you want to bring in something completely new, a lot of players and people are like, you know, I don't feel like learning a new system. They're intimidated by it, or they don't have time, or they're just, you know, we're all in our 40s and we're lazy and we don't feel like learning new things and blah, blah, blah. You know, whatever the excuse may be. So if I'm playing a game of D&D, I say, hey guys, we're going to play 1st edition or basic D&D instead of 5th edition. They're like, okay, we can probably learn that. We know how the system runs. So every edition is going to have the same basic mechanics. But when you go back to basic compared to 5th edition, you know, basic doesn't have death saves. Like, you have to make, you know, it's so hard to die in 5th edition D&D, it's ridiculous. You can make up to 5 or 6 rounds of saving throw rolls before you actually live or die, because of death saves. And hit points are if you game the system, you know, you create a hill dwarf with toughness feat and add to it, you know, a barbarian class. You know, you're with a constitution of 18, you know, you're looking at what, a minimum of 7 or 8 hit points or per level minimum. So if not more than that. So by level 10, you've got like 150 hit points, and, you know, so therefore, you know, if you're only doing a, you know, a D8 damage plus strength or whatever every round and all that other fucking shit, you know, combats are gonna last forever. Unless you use morale rules, or you say, you know, if every fight is to the death, which, you know, 99% of the time, that's how most people run the game, is all fights are to the death. You know, characters never run away. NPCs like monsters and stuff never run away. You could use morale rules, but that's much more of a common thing back in older editions. So that's another thing that's built into the system. But so with basic D&D, your hit points are a lot lower as a general rule because the hit point dice are lower. And once you hit a certain level, you stop getting hit points of dice anyway. You just get a flat bonus for hit points. And now your damage output's probably going to be lower also with basic D&D. However, you know, I still think that ratio is higher damage to lower on average hit points in basic than it is in 5th edition. But in 5th edition, you could do some major fucking damage. Your damage output can be phenomenal in 5th edition. But armor classes are also usually through the fucking roof. And hit points are through the roof. And between healing magic and potions and second winds and feats and all this other stuff, it's hard to die in 5th edition. So the stakes for combat are a lot lower in more modern games, I believe, than in old school games. And I know, again, any game can be played anyway and modified or house ruled anyway, but you know, out of the box, rules as written, it's a lot harder to die in 5th edition than it is in basic D&D. And I'm sure that's a feature of the game, not a bug, because that's the way they wanted it to be. It wasn't like an accidental thing. You know, everybody in today's day and age is very used to, in video games, having unlimited continues or unlimited lives or, you know, Phoenix Downs so you can keep resurrecting your characters, or, you know, healing potions, or the games are so easy that, you know, dying doesn't matter, or, oh, you die, continue from your last save spot? Yep, okay. So there's no permanent death in video games unless you're playing on a certain type of game that gives permadeath, which is pretty rare. Or you've unlocked a New Game Plus mode in a game or something like that in video games. So death came a lot easier in older versions of games. So I think that for me personally, that's something I want to come back. I want stakes to come back. I want there to be weight behind fighting in combat. And because there's a weight behind combat, because the stakes are higher and they're more meaningful and it's a more lethal and dangerous game, players are more probably you know, minded enough to maybe try and talk things out, be more clever and not avoid fighting, more role-playing to avoid fighting, maybe do morale, maybe have their characters run, and at that point your combats are going to be either non-existent, which I'm not saying I want non-existent combat, but the combat may be non-existent, or run a lot shorter because they might run off, the enemies might run off, or whatever. So I think bringing weight back to combat can speed combat up or avoid it altogether. And again, I'm not saying I want combat to be avoided altogether. I love combat. I just want it to feel like there's a purpose for it, not just to, you know, as a filler, a time filler. You know, like you buy a CD or something, and, you know, I'm 41, I'm talking about buying CDs or buying vinyl albums or whatever. But so you buy an album or a CD, and there's, you know, 13 songs on it, and there's like 2 or 3 radio hits, which is how most people these days think, and the other 9 songs on the album are just filler. You just skip them every time that they're on because you don't care about them. They're there just to fill up space to get to the good songs. I miss a time when every song was awesome. Nothing was filler. Nothing was like a throwaway track. When every song on the album was cohesive and part of the album and felt like it fit and there was a narrative to it. Well, I want combat to be that way too. I don't want it to just be, oh, well, if we don't throw in a couple extra combats here, this session's only going to last about an hour or two. So we got to throw in more combats to beef up the playing time or make it more fun or whatever. I want the combats to mean more something, and I want you know, skills to mean a little bit more something also, which is another thing I want to get into. But I'm almost home. I'm getting ready to pull up in the driveway, so I'm going to cut this off right here and stop at combat, since I kind of beat that horse to death probably 7 or 8 times in the last few videos I've made, which were a month ago. So anyway, I'm gonna start this back up, hopefully remembering what I'm talking about, and get into skills and things like that. So anyway, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I will see you later.